game is
Way too much for work. We should work that.
Did you know that yogurt is just yogurt? This is why I came to America.
Welcome to another episode of MIATC and the Chief. Patrick, we are once again live, so welcome to the show. So here's what we're going to do today, Patrick. Rather than do, this is kind of 2 weeks in a row, we're not going to do our normal thing. So 2 weeks in a row, we're going to talk major draft, full-on draft show once again. Now, what are we going to do this time, Patrick? Well, the draft's already happened.
We're going to talk 2022 draft.
Way too
prospect.
No, we're not doing a way too early mock draft. We are not. So here's what we are going to do, though. We are going to go through every single draft pick. Not necessarily every single draft pick. Take that back. We are going to go through every single team. And we will probably mention most, if not all, of the draft picks. But we're going to talk about every team, whether they did good or bad. What we liked, picks we didn't like. So we will do that. So, Patrick, let's not waste any time getting into this with the rigmarole that we usually might begin a show with. Let's just go straight into it and start with the Arizona Cardinals. So we're going to go alphabetically straight down the list because almost every list version, the easiest way to do it is to sort alphabetically so you can see all the picks rather than go round by round by round. So we'll start Arizona, and then obviously that means we will go to the Atlanta Falcons next. So we're going to go that direction. So NFC, AFC, all through the middle of this. You know where your team falls alphabetically. So if you need to skip forward a little bit, don't, because then you'll miss out on what the other teams have done. Patrick, starting with the Arizona Cardinals, they picked Zaven Collins in the first round. Obviously, we were on the air for that. Then they got Rondell Moore later on. Marco Wilson, a corner out of Florida. Victor Demukage, defensive end out of Duke. Tay Gowan out of UCF, another corner. James Wiggin, a safety out of Cincinnati. And then they picked up a center in the final round, Michael Minute out of Penn State. So, Patrick, Arizona, what'd you think? How'd you think they did?
So, I mean, obviously they went linebacker first, which they really do need a linebacker who's more of a traditional linebacker who can also cover the middle of the field. Obviously, they drafted one last year, but he's kind of like a Swiss Army knife type, and they're still kind of finding out what really is his best position in the NFL, where Zaven, obviously, he's an outside linebacker. Like, that's what he's going to do. They gave that offense another type of Swiss Army knife in Rondell Moore. We've seen what he can do in a return game. We've seen what he can do on the outside. We've seen especially what he can do on the inside. So now what have they got on offense? They've got two of some of the best wide receivers in A.J. Green, who he's declining, but he's still a serviceable wide receiver. And then, of course, they have DeAndre Hopkins. You pair that with Rondell Moore. Christian Kirk is still a solid wide receiver. I don't know where he's going to fit in or how Rondell Moore is going to battle out with wide receiver 3. I really like the Tay Gowan and James Wiggins picks for that secondary. It's really good depth later in the draft, who I'm pretty sure throughout most of next year we're going to see them on the field in some capacity. And then, I mean, into the 7th round is really where you're taking a shot in the dark, whether it's a lineman, whether it's a quarterback. I really like it. It's a solid draft. The only thing that I would have liked for them to address in some way would have been tight end, but I'm not really worried about them in that position. Like they're fine.
Well, and you figure that Cliff Kingsbury is not going to overuse tight ends, so it's maybe not as big of a deal. Now, I hate this draft class, Patrick, because it's in division, and I actually like this draft class. So if you listen to last week's show, the draft special, you know I love Zaven Collins. I thought Zaven Collins was my favorite linebacker. I realized Micah Parsons might be a better linebacker because he's a true linebacker, and Zaven Collins is a little bit more of a piece that you've got to know what you're doing with. Kind of like we talked about on draft day with Isaiah Simmons. They struggled maybe a little bit to figure out to do what to do with Isaiah Simmons last year. Maybe this year they can figure out a little bit quicker what to do with Zaven Collins and make that work. And you and I, of course, are Rondale Moore guys. If nothing else, it got Elijah Sindelar highlights on draft day, which bless that ACL that never could work out. But we were huge Rondale Moore fans at different points in time. So that pick to me can be scary. Again, it all depends. It's an interesting draft class to add that guy as a weapon, just because you look at, again, what you mentioned they have around them, and you get a guy maybe he's not Will Fuller. I'm not making a comp, but you get a guy for DeAndre Hopkins who can pull guys away in coverage like Will Fuller used to do at the Texans for DeAndre Hopkins. It's only going to make DeAndre Hopkins better. And then you mentioned the depth. I like what they did depth-wise in this class. So I definitely, again, I hate when a division rival has a good draft. But, man, can I say it? The Cardinals are trying to make me like them, Patrick. Like, I don't like the Cardinals, but they're my second favorite team in the NFC West now.
That's the strangest thing to hear. Like, they're my second favorite team in the same division. You're like, oh, the Titans are my second favorite team in the NFC South.
Well, I mean, I hate the Rams, and that'll you won't hear me say many nice things about the Rams. So, but maybe when we get to the draft, guys. So we both like what the Cardinals did. Let's move to the Atlanta Falcons, Patrick, a team that needed a lot. They did not address quarterback, which I think a lot of people thought that was an early thing that they might address. If they didn't go Kyle Pitts, a lot of people thought if why did I just blank on his name? Our boy, North Dakota State. Why can't I think of his name? Trey.
Lance.
Trey Lance. Duh. Wow, that was bad. Early we're getting a CTE episode, apparently. Anyways, we thought they might go quarterback at 4. They didn't. Trey Lance was off the board. Zach Wilson was off the board. It could have gone Justin Fields, and I don't think a lot of people would have hated it. But instead, they go Kyle Pitts. They pick up Richie Grant in the second. And then if you see any of the other guys that you're really excited about, feel free to go through those. But what do you think of this setup for them?
Atlanta always does some interesting things in the draft, and I know this is a completely new regime. So you mentioned quarterback. I think they're going to be fine at quarterback at least for this year because they have Matt Ryan, which they're going to have him the money up just because of the way that contract is set up. They can't get rid of him. They have A.J. McCarron, who if you're drafting or if you're wanting a backup, that's as serviceable as a backup as you can get. Like I don't even know when's the last time I've seen him in a regular season game if he's even been in one, but I mean, he is the definition of a backup quarterback, and he's one of these guys who's made his career as one, and he will continue to get rich as a backup quarterback. They signed Felipe Franks, who I don't know if he's going to be a camp arm. I don't know if they're going to keep him. I don't know what the deal is. Maybe he's going to be on their practice squad. I'm sure that's what it's going to be. You mentioned Kyle Pitts. I mean, the top skill position player drafted, highest drafted tight end ever. So that shows you what type of player Kyle Pitts is. Richie Grant, who you mentioned, I like Jalen Mayfield in the third, but more of like a developmental type. So he was getting a lot of hype like early in this process, around like January, February. He's a guy who didn't get to play a lot last year due to COVID and injuries. He played a little bit in 2019. His 2020 tape looked very improved from what little tape he had this past year compared to 19. But I think he only got to play maybe 2 games before he opted out. So we really haven't gotten to see a ton from him lately, and we haven't really got to see what type of progressions that he was making. But if they can develop him, or maybe even swing him inside first to get him on the field sooner, I think he's going to be a pretty solid player coming out in the third round. The only other position that I'm just in love with is a guy like Frank Darby in the sixth round. I think he's going to be. He's not going to be a one. He may not even develop into like a wide receiver two, but it's a type of guy who's make a lot of money. Maybe as a slot guy, a wide receiver three. He can catch a lot of 50-50 balls. He runs decently well. He can make a lot of those tough catches whenever they're available. He's a type of guy that we can see sneak in maybe like in year 2, year 3 onto the field. And then that's when he'll probably make some relevance on the field. But I like that depth they were able to bring in wide receivers so late in the day last Saturday.
Yeah, I think for me, for me, nothing about this particular class outside of their top 2 picks just screams something that makes me super excited. But I think the thing that they did do is they were able to get a lot of guys who maybe you're taking a little bit of a flyer on. But if you've done your due diligence, if you know what those guys are, you know that those guys are guys that you can maybe develop. Maybe they're more of a positional thing that at a position that you're good at developing. I think that goes a little bit underrated in these draft classes a lot of times. A lot of times you see, like with Seattle does this. Seattle will draft a corner that they're not necessarily, that everybody else isn't necessarily really high on. But Pete Carroll is very, very good at developing corners, and so it's not as big of a deal. If you take a guy late in the 6th round and you're Pete Carroll, you're okay with that. Whereas maybe if you're a team that doesn't develop corners well, you think, hey, I've got to get a guy early. So I think that's kind of what Atlanta's got going on here. Now, that means that this particular class is going to be hard to kind of grade for maybe the next couple of years because there are so few, I think, day one starters. I think Richie Grant and Kyle Pitts obviously are 2 guys that are going to start day one. But everybody else is kind of a little bit up in the air just because, again, I think they picked a lot of guys who maybe, again, could be really, really good, but ultimately are developmental guys. Patrick, let's move on to the Baltimore Ravens next. They went wide receiver early, which I think maybe surprised a lot of people. It surprised a lot of people, and I think it didn't surprise a lot of people. Maybe their receiving class core hasn't been the most impressive wide receiver core over the last couple years. That might have something to do with quarterback, which we can talk about maybe a little bit. But Patrick, what did you think of this class after they got Rashad Bateman in the first round, who a lot of people loved, but then maybe what they did later on?
So this is one of my favorite classes as a whole.
Really?
Because I don't know if there's really even a position where they missed on. Because I love Rashad Bateman. I know they traded. Well, it was because of the trade they made week prior, but because of the 2 first-round picks, they got Odafe Owe from Penn State, who I think they can develop as an edge. I know that we kind of criticize him because there was no sack production last year, but they drafted him probably just purely off of traits. No second-round pick. They drafted guys like Ben Cleveland, who's going to help them a lot inside on the line. Tylan Wallace, who I'm a big fan of. So they doubled down on wide receiver over the weekend. Then they drafted some quality players later in the draft, like Shaun Wade. I know a lot of people have crapped on him because at one point he was a first-rounder because he was playing inside in a slot corner position. And then once all those Ohio State defensive backs graduated, go to the draft, they moved him outside. And then when they moved him outside, that's when he turned into burnt toast.
Right. Well, and I think that's
stock plummeted.
Yeah, I think that's the key point to keep in mind with Shaun Wade is that if they use him inside as a slot guy, they probably got one of the steals of the draft. If they don't, unless he's developed something that we didn't see going into this process, the entire football season that Oklahoma State played, where he was, like as you mentioned, just getting burned like Anakin Skywalker, I don't see him being a great pick. If you do that, again, if you move him inside, if you keep him inside, you're probably okay. I disagree with you on the Tylan Wallace pick. I think if you're a team that maybe has a really, really good wide receiver room and a quarterback who spreads the ball around a lot, and you're a team that passes a ton, maybe he makes sense. To me, he's just very, this is going to sound really mean, unimpressive. When you look at a lot of the wide receivers that were in this draft class, there are guys who excel at everything, or there are guys who excel at one thing really, really well, or there are guys who excel athletically. And I think Tylan Wallace, for me, just falls in that category of meh. Like, and look, there are plenty of meh guys who have had a long career in the NFL, and that's part of how you stick in the NFL sometimes, is if you're not great at anything, but you're good at plenty of things, which I think he is. Don't get me wrong. Don't take that as he's not any good, but take it as I don't think he brings anything to the table that a different wide receiver couldn't bring. Now, obviously, you got him late. You got him you're going to have him on the cheap for a couple years, so you're probably in a good spot with that. But I don't know. To me, I don't know how good of a run blocker he is, especially coming from Oklahoma State, who, truth be told, is not the best rushing team in the country, and you're taking him in Baltimore. You're going to expect him to be able to run block, and even then, they're just not going to use a ton of receivers. So I think, to me, they could have maybe spent that in a different spot, spent that pick in a different spot and done something different. And okay, to me, this class is a very this class to me is the Tylan Wallace pick for them. It's very meh.
For me, it's one of my favorites because not only did they go in a lot of different directions, but if they can hit on some of these later picks, I think it could turn out to be like quality steals for them. Just because they didn't have a second rounder. They got some quality guys in the third round. The only one that I question is the Ben Mason pick. He's the top overall fullback, but they already have a Pro Bowl fullback.
But Patrick, this is the one team that might use three fullbacks at some point in time because that's the kind of team Baltimore is right now, and that's the way they're set up. Let's move on, Patrick. Let's go. We're going to stay in the AFC. We got the Buffalo Bills up next. Coming out the gates late in the first round with Gregory Rousseau. And then Carlos Basham Jr. really starting out heavy on edge rushers, and then doing some stuff like getting Spencer Brown, Tommy Doyle. What do you think of this? Well, before I ask you that, I will say they get an A+ grade, Patrick, for names, because Rashad Wildgoose, my favorite name in the draft this year.
What about old Cheesem?
Nope.
Cheeseman?
Nope. Cheeseman's second.
Wildgoose is definitely great. They drafted back-to-back defensive end, kind of like a team we'll talk about later. Gregory Rousseau and Carlos Basham, two guys who I really liked, who I kind of thought would both be day 2 picks. Rousseau just snuck in the first round, but, they addressed that sack production and disrupting the opposing O-line and quarterback is something that they haven't been able to do lately. And they've addressed that. While they haven't been able to do it, the guys who have been productive in their locker room probably won't be around for very much longer because they're getting quite a bit old, and guys like Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison, those guys aren't going to be around for very much longer. So they need to not only get younger, but also try to develop some more production alongside those two guys. Drafted, again, back-to-back O-linemen with Spencer Brown out of Northern Iowa, Tommy Doyle. I like this class. it's not one that I'm just in love with, but I can also see this one being sneaky good, just because they've got a speedster in Marquez Stevenson out of Houston. DeMar Hamlin is a guy that people who really study the draft and do this for a living, they've been raving about this kid. This was a guy who, if you're watching the draft, he was probably on the top of a lot of big boards, even towards the end of the fourth round, and then Buffalo's able to get him in towards the end of the sixth. So this could end up being a pretty big steal for a team that already has one of the best tandems at the safety position.
Yeah, I like this. I actually really like this class a lot because what if you get the team that has everything? You get depth, and they improved edge rushing, which they really needed to do. And then it never hurts to improve depth on your offensive line, on your offensive line. So I love what they did there. And then again, you take some pieces late that could turn out to be guys that people just missed on. So I like this for what it is. Again, it's not an impressive draft class in a vacuum, but when you take,
it's a lot of depth early on,
right? When you take what's already on the roster, I think it's a very good draft. Again, they didn't need a whole lot. Let's go now, Patrick, to the Carolina Panthers, and they went J.C. Horn at 8 overall, which I think to me was a little bit of a shock. Not that they went corner, but just that I thought Patrick Surtain was my top corner. I thought J.C. Horn is a little bit more of a tradey guy that you're hoping does something really, really good, rather than a guy who I'm pretty darn sure will be very good. And then I think they I'll just go ahead and say it. I actually really like what they did with this draft. Outside of drafting Chuba Hubbard, I think that one to me is a little bit of a question. Just one, how early they drafted him. I realize they got him at 126, but I'm not a big Chuba Hubbard fan. I don't think I realize what he did not this last college year, but the year before that was fairly impressive. But I'm not that impressed with the running. Well, and of course, who's surprised that Matt says a running back's the least favorite part of his draft? But I guess maybe to me this is a little bit of, are we preparing for if we decide not to pay Christian McCaffrey?
Well, I mean, they have already paid him.
Oh, that's right.
I can see what they're doing. They just lost their backup, Mike Davis, yeah. They just lost him to Atlanta. So I think that's what they were trying to go after, is that if they do have to play someone outside McCaffrey due to injury, they can kind of replenish some of the skill set that they're missing if Christian's not on the field. So I can see why they did that. They essentially addressed the backup running back position. Looking at their depth chart, after adding Chuba Hubbard, running back, so it's not great. So I can definitely see why they wanted to add him in. The only thing that would concern me is just how many miles that he's got on him, but
right,
they're not drafting him to start, so that's going to help him out a ton.
What do you think of Tommy Tremble?
I mean, I am a huge Tommy Tremble fan. I think Ian Thomas was a guy who they drafted back in 2018, kind of in the same area, who hasn't really panned out the way we all kind of thought that he might. So I can completely understand why they wanted to bring in another tight end. Trimble was a guy who didn't get a lot of catches in his time in college, but guess who also didn't get a lot of catches in his college career? George Kittle did. Which I'm not comparing him to George Kittle, but you are going to probably see more tight ends get drafted in the years to come who maybe had a total of 40, 30 catches in his career, but because of traits and because of blocking ability, you're going to get more than enough chances.
Well, and that's an interesting thing to keep in mind too about the difference between the way college football works and the way the pros work. Like in the pros, they tend to lean more towards getting tight ends the football, and in college, more your teams that use tight ends that have the tight ends tend to not throw the ball as much, and so of course tight ends don't get as many catches over the course of 10, 12 games as they might over 16. But I actually really like the Terrace Marshall pick where they got him. I think it's clear to me that they said, hey, we've got Sam Darnold. He's getting a year. He's at least getting a year. We talked about they hadn't yet. They did pick up the 5th-year option on him, which is huge. And so I'm interested to see what this offense can do, what Joe Brady can do with Sam Darnold if we can get a little bit of a reclamation project there and see if they can turn him into a good quarterback. If they can turn him into a good quarterback, which he's got the traits, then they got themselves a steal, and they worked themselves into a very, very good spot going into not this year, but maybe next year. Patrick, let's go to the Chicago Bears, and I'm going to go ahead and say, other than, well, they got him late enough that I don't really care with Khalil Herbert. I know he was kind of my overrated running back in a sense, but 216 is not a terrible place to get him. But Patrick, the Bears did very, very well for themselves, and why did they do well for themselves? Because they waited around. Well, I guess they traded up, but
They still kind of waited a little bit.
They still kind of waited around, and Justin Fields fell to them. And then you throw that on top of, in the second round, Tevin Jenkins fell to them. And I know you wanted Tevin Jenkins, and we'll obviously talk about the Colts here in a bit. You wanted Tevin Jenkins in the first round for the Colts, and that didn't happen. And the Bears ended up getting him. So regardless of what else happened in their draft, they did a very, very good job. If nothing else, getting a quarterback who is going to be better than Mitchell Trubisky.
I mean, yeah, that's a given for sure. I, for like the last few weeks, had really considered if Chicago or Washington was going to trade up to get a quarterback. I didn't know who it would be, and I didn't know who they would have to trade with. Because the problem with them, because they were 19 and 20 on the draft board, and you were probably going to have to trade up at least to 10, 11, 12 range to leapfrog New England, because we all expected them to draft a quarterback, which they did. But I didn't know who they would have to trade with, how much it was going to be, because however many picks you're leapfrogging, that just becomes more and more expensive. And I don't think it was terribly expensive in the long run to get Justin. And you mentioned they got one of my favorite linemen in the draft in the second round in Tevin Jenkins. I don't know if they're going to play him at right or if they're going to play him at left. They just cut their starting O-lineman at left tackle, who kind of like Indianapolis to get. So I don't know where Tevin is going to play at this point. It would be smart, in my opinion, if they just keep him at right, just because, I mean, I don't doubt that he could play left. But I would have just liked them to keep him at right as long as possible. But it looks like they're going to play him at left. Let me look at who else they picked up. They mentioned Khalil Herbert, who I like as far as just adding some depth there. I think that's good value. Daz Newsome could be an interesting prospect, wide receiver. Their seventh rounder is a guy who I was really hoping would get drafted. And my boy, Kyrus Tonga.
Yeah.
BYU.
Well, and it's always fun watching those BYU. Well, let's just be honest. The Polynesian defensive tackles getting picked because they're always short, squatty, and can move some folk around. So that's always fun. Patrick, let's go to the Cincinnati Bengals, who went Jamar Church in the first round. Jamar Chase in the first round instead of Penei Sewell, which a lot of people thought might happen. We actually thought correctly that it would be Jamar Chase, that they would go wide receiver, that they would reunite Joe Burrow with Jamar Chase. And I actually think that was probably the right pick, especially since they were able to get Jackson Carman in the second, who could end up being a very good tackle for them. But I think that one of the ways you can address the pass protection in two ways. One, you can draft offensive linemen, or you can get an elite wide receiver that teams have to think about in the passing game so much that it's going to affect the way they rush the passer. And so I love the idea of picking Jamar Chase. I love the Cameron Samples pick. Patrick, I'm going to say I called a couple of these. Several of my underrateds hopped way up the board from where they were supposed to be. Cameron Samples is one of those guys. I love this pick where they made it at 111. I think he's a very, very good player. He's going to be really interesting to see on that. And Patrick, we had a kicker picked in the 5th round, and that is Florida's Evan McPherson. 6'1", half dozen. Is that a good pick or a bad pick? In the 5th round, it's probably okay, but you're taking a risk anytime you get a kicker.
You take a risk with picking anybody.
That's fair.
So it's not in the 2nd round that we've seen before, and we also forgot to mention that Carolina took a long snapper in the 6th round. So shout out to the special teams. But yeah, I really like this draft quite a bit. I for about 24 hours was really questioning the Jamar Chase pick. Not that I don't like Jamar Chase; I think he's fantastic, but I just keep seeing the image of Burrow and the giant scar on his knee. I'm like, you really need to protect this guy. Well, what do? You mentioned Jackson Carman, who I really think is going to kick in and be a guard, which I think is a great idea, because I think he's going to be a lot better at guard. But they weren't done, because in the 4th round they drafted Deontay Smith from East Carolina, who I think is, he's depth right now. I think he played right tackle in East Carolina. But I think that was really solid for them to go ahead and get a guy like him, which I kind of wanted Indianapolis to get, but it is what it is. They drafted lots of help on the DN slide. They drafted Joseph Osai, Cameron Sample, your boy, Wyatt Hubert from Kansas State. He was really good in the Senior Bowl. I think it's a pretty solid draft.
Yeah, I mentioned, as some other things to mention, they also got Chris Evans, who I think is a running back who could develop into something that should be really fun. And, of course, you got Joe Mixon, so you're not super worried about the running back position. But anytime you can add a guy like that, especially that late, is interesting. But I really like what they did. Again, they could have gone Penei Sewell, but they went Chase, and I actually think that was the right move for them. Next up, Patrick, we got our Cleveland Brownies. So this is the part of the show where our good buddy Roger is going to for sure tune in. I know you're listening. I love what the Cleveland Browns did. And this is getting weird at this point. This is a couple drafts in a row that we've really liked what they've done. This is weird territory because the Browns are actually starting to get good. And Patrick, look, Greg Newsome on the back end helps them a ton. I love that they were able to get Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah in the 2nd round. Again, this is a guy that you and I think, thought would go maybe first. We had him going in the 1st round in our mock draft, didn't we?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. If not, we for sure thought he would be gone before the Browns would have a chance to do it. So I love that they were able to do that. I love then that they were also able to go and get Anthony Schwartz, because I think that's a guy who maybe on the surface, yes, he's a speed guy, and it looks like somebody that the ghost of Al Davis would have picked. But I love that they use this opportunity to say, hey, we've got some receivers, we've got good running backs, we've got some good skill position guys. Let's go get an absolute world-class burner and really stretch some of these defenses that we're playing. So I enjoyed that pick. I just think they did a good job, which again is weird to say with the Browns.
Yeah, we're used to really tearing them a new one, but from top to bottom, solid. You mentioned Newsome, Koramoah, Schwartz, even guys like James Hudson out of Cincinnati, who was another mid-tier offensive lineman who I would have loved for Indianapolis to get. They already drafted a stud in Jedrick Wills last year, but that's just adding depth in a position that it turns out late in the year they really needed. Demetric Felton, we really loved during the Senior Bowl. they can use him in all sorts of different ways. He was lining up a wide receiver during the Senior Bowl. He played a lot of running back at UCLA. I mean, I really love this draft class.
Yeah.
The only thing that I really wonder is with the wide receivers they've selected the last few years, and especially this year, what are we going to see Odell Beckham play for the Browns next year?
You know, that's a good question. Who knows? We're kind of in Aaron Rodgers territory with that. Like, it's hard to say who's really going to be, if he's going to be there or not. I don't know. They're seeming to plan, and this is what good organizations do. And this is, again, weird to say about the Browns, is that good organizations prepare for stuff like that. Good organizations prepare for, hey, so what if we don't have Odell Beckham Jr.? He's been hurt anyways, so why not do something, be prepared in case it's there. Next up, Patrick, we've got the Dallas Cowboys, and I'm going to tell you this right now. I'm not super impressed with this class top to bottom anyways. The fact that they traded with division rivals to drop 3 spots and pick the guy they probably should have just picked at their original draft spot anyways, because they gave... I like the Micah Parsons pick. Let me start there. Let me say nice things about Cowboys fans. I like what you did with Micah Parsons. I think that was a smart move. It was a good pick, especially since you didn't pick up the option on Leighton Vander Esch, because he seems to be as injury prone as Sean Lee and Jalen Smith. So, like, do a better job picking linebackers who aren't injury prone. I think Micah Parsons is a good start, maybe at least there. But Patrick, I don't like that because they drafted Micah Parsons after making a trade. That means Devontae Smith went to the Eagles, and so I think that's a net. I feel like that's a net not as good pick. So I actually am not a big fan of this Cowboys draft class.
Well, this is something that we need to consider too, because if they didn't make the trade, would he have stayed in division anyway and gone maybe to the Giants?
That's fair.
Maybe, maybe not. Because the Giants possibly would have made that trade anyway. So I don't know.
But let me ask you this, Patrick. Who are you more scared of offensively, Daniel Jones or Jalen Hurts?
Jalen Hurts.
Okay. So
even though we saw last year, Daniel Jones is sneaky athletic.
Yes, he is sneaky athletic, but I don't think the Giants...
Somehow he was able to run.
Right. I'm confused with the Giants from an offensive perspective. I just don't think... I'm not sure what their goal is, what they're trying to do. And so maybe on the one hand, that's smart to say, hey, we don't want them getting Devontae Smith. But I also don't want them going in division to my bigger rival with a team who I think is a little bit closer. I think the Giants...
Trading in division is just weird.
Right.
No matter what.
And that's why I have a little bit of a problem with it. Are you maybe preventing somebody from getting him and then at least getting some extra picks because of it? Sure, but it just seemed weird to me. I'm not a huge fan of it.
The only thing that I like out of it, I mean, they were able, since they traded down, they were able to acquire an extra pick or two. So, I mean, they've got so many holes on the defense. They need to make as many selections as possible because, obviously not all of them are going to hit. So the more chances that you have, the higher the percentage is.
Which is basically what they did.
It's exactly what they did. I mean, they drafted their first offensive draft pick was in the 4th round with Josh Ball out of Marshall, who size-wise seems like a guy that's going to be playing for the Dallas Cowboys, 6'7", 308 pounds, but
Ooh.
It's not someone you're going to see on the O-line like week 1. They drafted 2 offensive linemen and then Simi Fako from Stanford, who I like just based off of depth at the wide receiver position because they're going to be losing, I'm sure, a guy like Michael Gallup next year. So having somebody to replace Gallup, who, I mean, if they bring him back, cool beans. But, I mean, with Mari Cooper, with CeeDee Lamb, I'm sure Gallup's going to want to go somewhere where he can be featured more. So I get it. But, I mean, they drafted not only Michael Parsons. This is the one thing that I don't understand as far as the Michael Parsons pick. Again, I'm not hating on it. They drafted Jabril Cox in the 4th round, which I consider a steal, no matter who it is, because in the 4th round, a guy who probably should have been taken in the 2nd. That's a steal. So you got 2 linebackers. Well, not only that, but you have Jalen Smith. Not only that, you have Leighton Van Der Esch. Not only that, but they brought in Keanu Neal, who they have said is going to be playing linebacker. So you have all those linebackers. Can't play all.
Right. So I've got some issues with that draft, but we'll move on. Let's go to the Denver Broncos. Now, I actually, in a vacuum, I like this draft class a lot. You got Patrick Surtain, you got Javonte Williams. I hate this draft class because they took my boy Quinn Miners away. Not that the Seahawks are probably going to draft him anyway, but they took him, which makes me a little bit upset. And I think at 105, there are some people who would think that Baron Browning is a big steal. But man,
including me.
Right. Here's why I don't like it. You know who was on the board when they made a pick? In the first round?
Which pick?
In the first round.
Oh, in the first. Well,
it's easy. Justin Fields, Patrick. Justin Fields. Who is playing quarterback for? Are you okay with Teddy Two Gloves? Are you okay with Drew Lock? And not that Justin Fields is a for sure thing, because obviously he's not necessarily yet, and he's got to prove it on the field before anything else. But Patrick, I just, when you're a team that's unsure at quarterback and you've got that kind of quarterback on the board and you don't take him, I question it a little bit.
So I know you're not going to agree with me, and that's fine, because not very many people do. But I don't like the idea of tossing Drew Lock to the side so early. This is why. So, he was drafted in 2019. He didn't play until about 3 or 4 games left in the year. And the future looked pretty bright. I mean, he wasn't fantastic, but the future looked pretty bright for him. And his rookie year didn't play very much. So he's going into 2020 as the starter, and there was a lot of hype around him. Well, COVID happened. He didn't get any type of offseason with him as the starting quarterback. And then not only that, but his number 1 receiver in Cortland Sutton went down, I think, the 2nd game of last year. So not only did he not get a chance to prep fully as a starting quarterback, but then he lost his number 1 offensive weapon. The Broncos did, however, do a very good job about drafting last year other offensive weapons to go around him. You look at what all they brought in last year. I mean, it was insane. So they did so much about bringing in pieces around him and toys to play with. The only thing I don't like, and not only that, but he was injured for a decent bit of last year as well.
Okay.
I don't know how much chemistry he's able to build with those pieces. So I like him having this year the same way that Daniel Jones is going to have this year, is like a big prove it year.
Okay, but answer me this. Who do you think is the better quarterback right now? If you're building your franchise, do you want Drew Lock or do you want Justin Fields? You have no other options. You get Justin Fields or you get Drew Lock.
I mean, I would take Fields.
And that's my point. Like, this is what we talk. We see this all the time with quarterbacks, and we're kind of, you kind of think about it with the Aaron Rodgers issues going on, and you look at your roster and you go, do I have a quarterback that can win a Super Bowl for me, or do I not? Is quarterback X better than quarterback Y? If he's not, you ought to be doing what you can to get quarterback X. There are a lot of teams who should be trying to figure out how to get Aaron Rodgers right now, because there are a lot of teams who don't have a quarterback that good. There are a lot of teams who don't have a quarterback as good as Justin Fields. Again, we don't know what he's actually going to do in the NFL, so maybe that's a moot point, and he could turn out to be a very bad quarterback. But I think that at least from what I've seen, you basing off of film that we saw in college, basing off what little film we have of Drew Lock in the NFL, I still question whether Drew Lock is a long-term answer at quarterback as your starting quarterback. To me, Drew Lock screams more like a guy like Charlie Batch, a guy that can come off of the bench and give you some problems if he comes off as a backup if he has to play 2 or 3 games in a season. But if he's got to play the whole 16, I think my team could be better off. Justin Fields, if he turns out to be the guy that we think he might be, I think could be a quarterback for a long, long time and a very good quarterback for a long, long time. And so, again, this is less about Drew Lock maybe and talking about this class. I love Patric Surtain again. And I think they did some good depth stuff later on. So you're not wrong. I think I'm okay with them giving it another year, a prove-it year for Drew Lock. But I think they maybe passed up on a guy that could be a franchise quarterback versus a guy that you're not sure if you're going to pick up options or give him a second contract. If you're questioning it at all, if quarterbacks are a need, you should be addressing it as quickly as you can, because we've seen in this league you need a quarterback to win. Patrick, let's move on to the Detroit Lions.
But before we go to Detroit, and maybe this is always something to consider too, because teams are always looking ahead. So maybe they see what they have. They see Justin Fields like, we could do this, or we can continue to build the rest of the team. And then if Locke ain't doing it, maybe they like what they see next year a little bit better.
Yeah,
I'm not saying they're next year better than they could get. I'm just saying maybe they're looking that far ahead.
Well, and you look at that class, I've already seen some too early mocks, and I'm not super pumped about the quarterback class coming out because your top guys are going to be Spencer Rattler and Sam Howell. Neither one of those guys I'm super pumped about right now. So we'll just have to see. Let's move on. We got to move through some of these fairly quickly. I'll say this, Detroit Lions, I love what they did. They got Penei Sewell. Obviously, we love Penei Sewell. They got one of my guys in Ifeatu Melifonwu. So I think they didn't have a ton of picks, but what they did with them, I actually really like.
Yeah, Levi Wuzarike I really like. Lee McNeil is really solid. I think they got some solid value in Amon-Ra St. Brown. They needed a wide receiver desperately, and they got one in the 4th. I know they brought in some UDFAs.
I was going to say, I actually like what they did in their undrafted free agent section of this draft class, so to speak, than what they did during the draft. They brought in my boy Jonathan Adams. They brought in Sage Surratt, they brought in Rakeem Boyd for running back, which now that they've let Kerryon Johnson go, maybe it is a move that makes a lot of sense. So I think in and around the draft, they've done quite a bit that I really like.
Yeah, they also signed former Razorback Jerry Jacobs at corner. I mean, they were one of the most active teams during the UDFA process. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens throughout the offseason as it continues on. But yeah, I think it's really solid. I think they weren't very active throughout the draft, in my opinion, in terms of moving around. We've already seen a lot of teams that had a lot more picks than what they had. But I really like what they've done. They've added a lot of depth and a lot of value in what they're doing, and I think it's a really nice building block for what they're trying to do.
Yeah, so let's go on to the Green Bay Packers, Patrick. Obviously, the news dropped that basically Aaron Rodgers hates everything about Green Bay and wants to get out of there. And I can't say I blame him, because you look at what they did in the draft. And again, this is not anything against Eric Stokes. Eric Stokes is a fine player, probably. But I we'll say what we said on draft night. You've got a quarterback who already says, hey, I don't really want to be there. I don't like what you guys have done. the last couple drafts. I don't like the way you've set up an offense for me. And what do? You go corner in the first pick. Then you go center, which is not bad, in the second pick. And it takes you until the third pick to get a wide receiver. And you pick Amari Rodgers, who, again, this is not a shot at Amari Rodgers, is a fine wide receiver and will probably be okay. But Patrick, you had the opportunity early on to pick an elite wide receiver, and you basically said, no, we don't care about Aaron Rodgers. We're going to draft what we want to draft.
You look at the wide receivers that they could have taken that were available after pick 29. Elijah Moore would have been great. A lot of mocks had him there. The next wide receiver that was taken, Rondale Moore, would have been great. Dwayne Eskridge, Tutu Atwell. I mean, those are guys. Terrence Marshall. I mean, come freaking on. And they don't pick a wide receiver until the third round, which is, if they're complaining that all this is going out into the public, why are you waiting so long to pick wide receivers? Why did you not take one at all last year?
Right.
Why do you refuse to build around your franchise quarterback who he knows he doesn't have just a ton of time left, so he's trying to make use of what time he actually has and trying to get another Super Bowl, and he's telling you, I can't do it with what you got. You've got to bring in someone better. You've got to bring in some competition in the wide receiver position, because what we got ain't doing it, but then you won't bring anyone in, so don't be surprised if, one, you don't have Aaron Rodgers anymore, or if you somehow do, won't be surprised if you don't win a Super Bowl because you don't have anyone outside of Devontae Adams who he'll probably come out and tell you, I love all the attention I'm getting as far as passes thrown to me, but I can't do it all.
Right.
We've tried that, and it's not working.
Right. So let's go now, Patrick, to a team that we won't spend a lot of time on, and that is the Houston Texans. Because even though Bill O'Brien is not their head coach and their GM or whatever he was called there, this was a terrible draft class, Patrick. Their first pick is Davis Mills, right? Which is a terrible pick. The most average quarterback in this draft, I think, in terms of, I just absolutely don't want him. And that's your backup plan for Deshaun Watson?
Oof. Well, I guess technically that's not their backup plan. Because technically their backup plan, as of right now, is Tyrod Taylor. Which, it's Houston, so they could sabotage that. If you thought the Chargers were sabotaging Tyrod, it's Houston. They could straight up cap the guy.
I was about to say, I'm scared for Tyrod Taylor, or Tyrod Taylor, excuse me. I'm scared for Tyrod Taylor being anywhere at this point. With what is it about him and just being in places that aren't great for quarterbacks, apparently? Because he just kind of skips around the bad place.
Which technically he agrees to. It's not like he was traded there.
That's right. And look,
he will over there.
Jokes about him aside, I'm also just not a big fan of Nico Collins. Wasn't a fantastic go get you pick for me. I'm not sold on Brevin Jordan as in
the fifth though.
I mean that late, sure. You take a flyer on him, I guess, but I don't
him in the fifth. I wasn't a fan of him second, third, but in the fifth, sure thing.
Maybe look. They barely had any picks. They had 5. No wait, is that 5? Yes, they had 5 picks, and Davis Mills was your first. So that's all you need to know on how bad theirs was. Patrick, let's go to the Indianapolis Colts next, and I'm not going to let you talk first because I know what you're going to say, and I don't want you to say the wrong thing, so I'm going to save you from yourself. So I think the Kwity Paye pick, Patrick, it was a good pick. I think it was the right pick. What was there, what was available, going defensive end, getting an edge rusher first, I think was a very, very smart pick. And I like what they did after that, actually. I think Kylan Granson is going to be an interesting piece to that. And look, so what if they waited till their last pick to get an offensive lineman?
Do I have the floor now?
Yes, except this is where I will say, if you're not watching the live stream, if you're listening to this on podcast, sure, keep subscribing, keep downloading the podcast. That's great. But this would be the spot to go watch Patrick because we might have a little bit of a meltdown.
Look, Chris Ballard, everyone raves about Chris Ballard, and I've raved about Chris Ballard. But unless 75% of these picks hit, this is his first bad draft class. And then we need to watch out for next year. Because if he's got 2 in a row, then we're getting on some Grigson territory. And I'm not a fan of that. I've already been down that road. I don't want to do it again. So, you mentioned, give me my soapbox.
You have it.
Because I deserve it.
But
So,
quickly, you got to have a soapbox.
I told you whenever the Quiddy Pay pick happened, well, a couple minutes after, I will like it if they address the left tackle position on day 2. And if they get someone solid on day 2, then I will fall in love with it because I was really comfortable with the idea of them getting Quiddy Pay if they, one, couldn't trade down, or if there was a run on offensive tackles and there was nobody to pick, and I didn't want them to reach for somebody. So they didn't trade down, so there goes option 1. Option 2 was if there was a run on tackles. Well, guess what? Christian Darrison was pick 23. That would have been amazing because no one saw him going to pick 23. And then Tevin Jenkins, who was moving to left tackle in Chicago, was a second-round pick. So that's why I don't like the Quiddy Pay pick so much. It's because they could have addressed left tackle and then gone edge if they wanted to day 2, which they didn't go left tackle at all. So there goes the Quiddy Pay pick. I may end up liking this kid from Vanderbilt, depending on his rehab. I also I understand edge is a need, but I don't want. We're not a team that just has everything figured out for the most part, like Buffalo, and you can just go depth. We don't have that. So he may be great. I don't anticipate him playing this year because he tore his ACL in January. So that's probably just going to be a redshirt year this year. So that's another reason why I'm not a fan of it in the second round. I'm going to address every pick here, so just bear with me.
Well, you better speed it up a little bit.
Kylan Granson, I am warming up to it. I had never heard of him up until he was picked, but I can see why they want him in the offense because he's kind of your prototypical new school tight end. Sam Ehlinger, I'll talk about him later on. I mean, if he hits, he hits, and then you can use him as draft capital later. If he doesn't, I'm sure everybody needs a backup, and it's probably going to create. They probably wanted to create competition with Eason. I don't know how his development is going, so I don't necessarily hate it. From what I've seen with this Mike Strachan kid from Charleston, he could be a really big steal. He put up insane numbers in the lower tier FCS. I honestly really like that pick. I don't know what Will Fries is going to do. I don't know if he's even going to make it the team, but we'll see. There's just too many questions on this one, and it kind of just seemed like they were just throwing darts at the dartboard, and if it hit a name, they're like, we're going to pick this guy.
Well,
It didn't seem to me like there was any type of plan, but I could be completely wrong.
Well, again, just to go back to it, I think the Quiddy Pay pick is going to be one you're going to be really happy with in 5-6 years. I question the Sam Ehlinger pick. Just because why waste a pick there? Because Sam Ehlinger's not going to be a good NFL quarterback. if he's
See, I'm with taking flyers on quarterbacks in the 6th, 7th round. Because I think if you want to try to take a shot in the dark and try to get a developmental guy, that's when you do it.
See if no. You see if he sticks around till undrafted free agency. You have a developmental backup quarterback in Jacob Eason, and maybe Jacob Eason is dog garbage, and that's why they do it. But if you're doing it for that reason, you're already messing up because Sam, if you think Jacob Eason's an issue on your roster because you're worried Carson Wentz is going to get hurt and not play all 16 games, then you need to draft a quarterback way earlier than Sam Ehlinger because Sam Ehlinger is not going to do you any better than Jacob Eason if he comes in for an injured Carson Wentz. So that's where the issue with that is for me. I'm fine taking flyers on quarterbacks, and I'm fine taking flyers on quarterbacks in the 5th, 6th, 7th round. But if you're going to do it, you better do it in a way that makes sense. And I just don't know. To me, it's Sam Ehlinger. I mean, like, horns down, but also it's Sam Ehlinger. Like, we've seen enough tape of Sam Ehlinger, Patrick, to know that he was barely a decent Big 12 quarterback. And we know how good most Big 12 quarterbacks are when they get in the NFL. So the idea that Sam Ehlinger, who is at best a above average Big 12 quarterback, is going to be anything different than what we expect of him in the NFL is a big, big question mark for me.
You could turn a 6 into a 3rd with that pick.
Maybe.
If it hits.
If it hits, he's never going to see the field. How are you going to know if it hits? He's never going to see the field.
Yeah, you never know. That's why I don't hate it in the 6th.
Patrick, I'll say this:
if he actually has to play and he turns out pretty solid.
But here's the thing: if you're upset about them not picking an offensive lineman until after Sam Ehlinger, I've got bigger questions because why are you picking Sam Ehlinger if offensive tackle is a bigger need?
At that point, there wasn't one for them to take, and they technically took a guard in the 7th round. They didn't even take a tackle.
Then you know what? You and I are on the same page of the Colts did not have a good draft.
Do what?
I said then you and I are both on the same page that the Colts didn't have a good draft. Let's move on to the Let's move on to the Jacksonville Jaguars, Patrick, and we're going to pick up steam a little bit here. Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne. I know you weren't as high on Travis Etienne as maybe a lot of people were. I think it's a fine pick for them. I like a lot of what they did in this. I mean, really, Trevor Lawrence is the main thing. After Trevor Lawrence, they could have drafted a bunch of rocks, and I'd have been okay with it.
Lining up a bunch of rocks.
To be fair, a bag of rocks would be better than the offensive line they've had in the past.
That's very true. I mean, depending on the rocks you got in that bag, you may not be able to move them. Yeah, I really like Tyson Campbell. I thought was solid. Walker Little, I think they're going to be able to line him up on either left or right. There's a lot of solid picks in this draft class. So I mean, I am a big fan of what Jacksonville was able to do.
Yeah, I think they did. I think they did a fine job there, and of course, it's all dependent on Trevor Lawrence. Let's move on to the Kansas City Chiefs, Patrick. Not necessarily doing a lot early. They made some trades to hop up into the second round and do some stuff. I'm ambivalent on the Nick Bolton pick, whatever. I actually really, really, really like the Creed Humphrey pickup at number 63. I think that was a real good move for them.
I mean, watching Nick Bolton and watching SEC, he's a thumper. So I don't know what their linebacker situation is. It could just be a good number 2 in a certain position. But I do like Bolton a good bit. But not only to get a guy like Creed Humphrey, but to get a developmental guard in Trey Smith in the 6th round, I think was great. I think a lot of people expected him to get a tight end at some point just because they have one of the best, but he's going to need a little bit of help.
Can I ask you this, Patrick? Can I ask you this? Where was this Duke team this football season? Because they had several guys drafted. And my first thought when I saw all these guys go across the board was like,
How come
Did I miss something? Did
they had a ton of picks drafted, but as a team, as a unit, they didn't play like they were going to have a lot of prospects.
yeah, I like
And I get as a fan of a team who didn't have a lot of prospects.
yeah. Let's say I also really like the Cornell Powell pick where they got him. I think he's a good solid number 3 receiver. Which again, just more toys for Patrick Mahomes on that offense. Patrick, Las Vegas Raiders. Let's talk about them real quick. Coming out of nowhere and picking Alex Leatherwood, who I don't think did anybody really have him projected as being a first round guy. Given the tackle class that there were, did you?
I did.
Why?
I had because one, look. I've watched the tape on Leatherwood, and he played like a first rounder. I had him going like in the 30s.
Yeah, look,
So,
I give that a hard
20 or 22. But from what I saw, he definitely played like a first round talent.
Yeah,
I didn't think he was going to be 17.
Right. I think that's
get it twisted.
That's more the thing. I think both of us would have thought, hey, especially you get a guy like that from Alabama who's a good player. You think, sure, first round, but like you, I thought he was a late first rounder in terms of just value. You could argue that there were several offensive tackles that were a little bit better than him. To me, he's a guy that maybe plays better than he tests and plays better than maybe he's a football guy, right? Like he seems like more of that sort of a guy. At 17, it seemed a little weird.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people who are like, oh, well, he's going to be the first round anyway. It's like, okay, yeah, but could they have moved down? There was a left tackle I thought was, and this is why I think they drafted him at 17. This is why I think they drafted him when they did, I guess. Not saying that he's the 17th best player in the draft, but Alex Leatherwood is a guy who can probably play 4 out of the 5 positions on the O-line. He was very solid at left tackle. You can put him in at guard, and he'll probably be fantastic. You might even have to put him on the right side. I think he has played on the right side in some games. So I think that's why they did it. They had so many holes on the offensive line, and they only drafted 1 lineman, which to me is ludicrous. You get rid of your whole offensive line, and you only draft 1. Granted, it was the first round, but you draft 1.
Well, no. They picked up a center late. Didn't they also just get a guard from the Lions?
So right now, I'm looking at outlines, but they've got left tackle Colt Miller, obviously, Richie Incognito at left guard, Andre James at center, who don't know who that is. They've got Denzel Good penciled in at right guard. Good luck with that. And then they've got Alex Leatherwood right now at right tackle. So, I mean, the left side is solid. I question the right side, though. And I'm not questioning because Leatherwood's on there. I question it because, one, I've seen Denzel Good. He ain't it. Don't know who Andre James is. Probably ain't good. Which, they do have Nick Martin out of Houston. And then they just drafted Jimmy Morrissey, even though he was a 7th rounder. So they might have the center lined up. But for a while, the right side of that O-line is going to be in question.
Yeah. Let's move on, Patrick, to the Los Angeles Chargers. They pick up Rashawn Slater at 13 overall, a pick that we were kind of screaming for at that point. I feel like it was like, all right, somebody take him, somebody take him, somebody take him. The Chargers did to improve that offensive line, and then they pick up Asante Samuel Jr. later on. Maybe a bit of a reach, maybe to come and get Josh Palmer at 77. Some other guys. There's another Duke guy. Late, they get Larry Roundtree III, who's an interesting pick late. What do you think of this class?
So, you mentioned the Josh Palmer. I don't like him as a whole. I don't hate, and I think he did solid in the Senior Bowl. What pick was he? I know it was like 7. Okay,
77.
77. So, De'Ami Brown was picked at 82, who I think is better. Amari Rogers was picked at 85, who I do think is better. Nico Collins, Anthony Schwartz. So, I mean, there are some probably better options. And I do think they need some help at the wide receiver position because I am out on Mike Williams. I'm out.
Yeah.
It was their first round pick in 2017. He hasn't really been able to stay healthy. He hasn't done much whenever he's on the field. Like, he hasn't really helped Keenan Allen at all. And as a avid fantasy football fan who continues to live, all right, this is it for Mike Williams. This is it. This is the year. It's never been the year. It's never going to happen. Stop saying it's going to happen. So they really did need somebody to help out. And plus, losing Hunter Henry as a hybrid type guy, tight end, which they did draft Trey McKitty. They did need some help with somebody catching passes. I mentioned Larry Roundtree as a sleeper at running back. That is kind of a crowded running back room, so I hate that he ended up going there, but I do hope that he can stick, whether it's with the Chargers or somewhere else, just because they've already got Justin Jackson, they've already got Josh Kelly, who they drafted last year. Josh Kelly was solid. So I don't know how much time Larry Roundtree's going to see, but, I mean, as a whole, I think this draft class is pretty solid.
Yeah.
It's not my favorite, but I don't hate it.
Yeah, they got the big one with Slater, so that's a for sure hit. Let's move on to Los Angeles Rams, Patrick, a team that I absolutely hate. As is obvious if you've ever listened to an episode of the show. The one that stands out for me is obviously Robert Rochelle at 130 out of Central Arkansas corner. He was one of my sleepers. I really, really hoped that he would be a guy that maybe the Seattle Seahawks would go after. But he was off the board way before Seattle had a chance to go after him, basically. So I like that pick. The rest of it, I'm kind of just, I don't know. I mean, Tutu Atwell is what Tutu Atwell is. He's another fast guy from Louisville who we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, there are some picks that I am a fan of, but as a whole, I don't want to compare it to Indianapolis, but I question what they're trying to do. I don't know why they went ahead and took a guy like Tutu Atwell as their very first pick, because wide receiver is not their top priority.
No.
Because they have Robert Woods, they have Cooper Kupp, they have our boy Van Jefferson. What I think was tuning in as the season wound down.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was really getting his rhythm in. And they just They just signed Deshaun Jackson, which I actually have a funny story to tell you about Deshaun Jackson when we get off the air.
Okay.
Actually, yeah, because this episode doesn't go pretty long. So I don't think the wide receivers are their biggest need. I do like Bobby Brown out of Texas A&M. He was kind of a sleeper guy for me, but the rest of this draft class, I just question, like, what were you trying to do here? Like, I don't know. It kind of screamed no direction.
Yeah, absolutely. They kind of meandered their way through the draft, and it was like, again, throwing darts to the wall. Let's move on to the Miami Dolphins, Patrick, who I think absolutely crushed it. They got the two Jalens in the first round with Jalen Waddle and our boy, friend of the pod, Jalen Phillips, who I think they did just a real solid job. Then they get Liam Eichenberg later on. They get Hunter Long later on. Not the massive wealth of picks that they've had the last couple of years, but I really like what they did.
Yeah, I mean, they, from top to bottom, even in the freaking 7th round, they were taking guys who scouts were saying could develop into some top talent. I mean, they nailed it. I really love what they were able to do. I'm interested to see what they're going to be doing with Hunter Long because they have Gesicki. So they might have drafted him if Gesicki doesn't continue to develop, which I like what happened with him last year. But that one was, I didn't hate it. I just thought it was interesting. But I really love what they were able to do.
Yeah, so good draft from us. Minnesota Vikings are up next, Patrick. They waited, and somehow still managed to get Christian Darrisaw, who a lot of people thought would be absolutely gone by then. But then they very questioningly, I think, for me at least, took Kellen Mond. And, man, I want to say good things about it. I like what they did with Chaz Surratt later on. They got my boy, Kene Nwangu, who was my sleeper, and I think at running back, and I think could be, again, that's kind of a crowded running back room, maybe a little bit, but I like that option there. And so I like a lot of what they did. They took a flyer on Zach Davidson out of Central Missouri, a tight end that a lot of people kind of loved here late in the process. I think overall they did pretty darn good. It's a deep class, obviously, because they picked a ton of people. But man, the Kellen Mond one left me scratching my head because I'm obviously a bigger Kirk Cousins fan than a lot of people are. But man, again, you draft a quarterback that high, you're inviting questions about the quarterback position.
I don't understand why Minnesota fans aren't higher on Kirk Cousins than we are. Because I don't see anything wrong with Kirk Cousins. I don't. So I don't understand why you're bringing in someone like Kellen Mond in the third round. Because, I mean, Kirk Cousins hasn't won you a Super Bowl, but I think people, for some reason, forget that only one team wins the Super Bowl. So you've got 31 others who, are you trying to replace them immediately? I mean, they haven't improved year after year, but I don't think that Kellen Mond is an upgrade in any sense than Kirk Cousins. I don't think he would be.
Well, no. So to me, Kellen Mond is a tradey guy that you might. Man, he's such a project. Like he was so inconsistent at Texas A&M. And look, I get it. On the one hand, you could say, okay, well, Kirk Cousins is an inconsistent quarterback for Minnesota. Okay, but he's an inconsistent quarterback in the NFL, and I would say he's less inconsistent than most NFL quarterbacks. I think he's in the slightly above average range of the NFL at that position, and I just wonder why you bring in Kellen Mond, who you're gonna maybe get rid of in a couple years.
I know why. Because he was the MVP of the Senior Bowl. Who else has been an MVP of the Senior Bowl?
Kirk Cousins?
No.
Who?
Justin Herbert and also Dak Prescott.
Oh, well,
so
fair.
That's why they did. They see quarterbacks who've been the MVP of the Senior Bowl and like, oh, obviously they're going to do well. So that's why they did it. Well, obviously that's a joke. One pick I really like, and I kind of figured they were going to take Elijah Vera Tucker, but they traded out of their pick, I think, originally at 14. But if you're not going to get the best guard, why not get the second best guard?
Wyatt Davis.
And get Ohio State. I really like that, and I like the value too.
Yeah, especially they're at 86. So I think overall a fairly good class for the Minnesota Vikings.
I mean, they had a ton of picks, so I mean, they're probably going to hit on a lot. They'll miss on some, but as a whole, I am a big fan.
Well, let's go to a team that we always want to question, but somehow their head coach and GM make us not question them 5-6 years down the road, and that's New England Patriots. Patrick, they waited around and got Mac Jones at 15, where I said he would end up all along. I've been saying this, Patrick, since...
Oh, I know.
When? Since before the season started? Like, I feel like I've been saying this forever.
You were saying it during the college football season, during the actual season.
I feel like at one point in time I said the words, if Mac Jones is not a New England Patriots quarterback, ... I feel like I said that. Man, look, love or hate the pick, I don't know. It's going to be hard to say. Mac Jones to me, and I said it during the draft show and I've said it before, is the most Tom Brady-like of the quarterbacks in this class. In that, I think... Man, look, he's not great at anything, but if the rumors about how good he is at digesting an offense are true, then that, to me, makes sense why Bill Belichick would want him. And Does his arm strength leave something to be desired? Maybe. I think it's kind of in the slightly above average arm strength area. His accuracy, it's hard to know when you've got Jalen Waddle and you've got Devontae Smith who can run underneath the football no matter where you throw it and make you look good. So it's just, that's part of what's hard about evaluating these quarterbacks that are really, really good teams. We see it with Ohio State quarterbacks all the time. We see it with Alabama quarterbacks a lot. And so we see it with Oklahoma quarterbacks a lot. Although that's trended more in a positive area here lately with Baker and even Jalen Hurts to some degree, although a lot of that was Alabama cred as well. But so you kind of got a double dose of quarterback schools that aren't great. I don't know. The rest of this draft, I like they went Alabama, Oklahoma. I like the Ramadre Stevenson pick. I think that's a good one. That is a very New England Patriots running back. Now, don't draft him on your fantasy football team because he'll probably have.
Because you don't know who they're going to play that week.
Right. He'll probably have 3 games this season where he has 2 rushing touchdowns, and then he won't get carries for the next 3 weeks. But I think he's a good fit for that team. And look, par for the course, this New England draft class is just going to be hard to evaluate until 3 years down the road because that's a Bill Belichick draft class.
No. You kind of really nailed it there. One pick that I did take my boy Cameron McGrone in the 5th round, which I think he got injured during the draft process, so that's probably one reason why he slipped a little bit. But Ronnie Perkins, I know they really wanted to add some extra defensive line and sack production on the edge, even though they brought everyone that they had previously back. So he's definitely adding some depth there at the edge. So I really like that one quite a bit. But yeah, I think this is one of the only spots for Mac Jones that if he goes there, it's going to end up beautifully for him because he's not going to play right away. I don't know when he's going to play. This year. I know you.
I disagree there.
Think he's going to play this year.
Which we're
you
allowed.
Don't think he's going to play this year?
Cam Newton's not starting 16 games.
That's what I'm saying. I don't know when he'll. I am in the camp that he'll probably play this year, but I don't know when that's going to be. And I don't think it's going to be
I think it'll be early.
Week 3, week 4. But I think I have convinced myself that he's going to play at some point.
Well, I will say what I always say with rookie quarterbacks on teams that we're not sure if they're going to start the season or not. What week is their bye week? You don't have to look it up, but that's about when I would assume that Belichick.
I don't know. We don't have the schedule yet.
Right.
I think we'll get it next week.
So that's when I would consider him probably starting. But I could see as early as week 6. Week 5 or week 6, I could see Mac Jones being the starter over Cam Newton because Cam Newton doesn't have it. And maybe he's gotten it back a little bit. And you can make the argument about what was around him last year. And sure, that's somewhat valid. But Cam Newton is not Cam Newton. And people of 2015. And people are waiting for that to come back. And I don't necessarily think that's going to happen. And really, that was a bit of the offense around him that made that what it was, more so than I think the skills of Cam Newton. But that is what it is. Let's go down to the New Orleans Saints, Patrick, who, is it safe to say whiffed in the first round? I think I don't hate Paulson Adebo late or in that 3rd round. And I'll actually say this. I actually kind of like their idea of picking Ian Book, who I don't necessarily like a ton, but you look at what they have at quarterback on roster, and I think if you're not going to address quarterback early, which they kind of got picked out of a chance to get an early quarterback, I think a guy like Ian Book makes a lot of sense. Because a guy like Ian Book, what was he actually good at in game? And it was a lot of being off script. And if you're going to have a guy take over for a guy like Drew Brees, who is in script, and not that he's going to be a day one starter. He's a project quarterback, and obviously you got Jameis Winston on that roster. You got Taysom Hill. So I like this guy as a late round flyer. You talk about flyers. I like a guy like Ian Book as a late round flyer that look, he's got enough athleticism that he might be able to turn into something. Or, you've got 2 quarterbacks on roster, so you're probably okay. Other than that, this draft class is unimpressive to me.
Peyton, this is this is my biggest pet peeve with the Peyton Turner pick. Yeah, they needed to address the DN because they lost Trey Hendrickson. I get that, whatever. This is my biggest pet peeve. You may have noticed it, you may not have noticed it. This is what I have hated so much. Because after the pick, I have not seen anyone, whether they get paid or they don't get paid, to do this. I have not seen any person, anyone, slate Peyton Turner as a first round pick.
No.
The only thing in writing or over the air, whatever, that I'd seen like a couple of hours, maybe 2 or 3 before the draft, Schefter tweeted out that there was really obviously the day of, but there was late buzz around him just because of his character and all that stuff. I'm like, look, he's great, but I don't see him being a first rounder. I thought around 28 in the second at least. And I'm getting to my pet peeve now. Now that he is a first round pick, every single person's like, oh, I love Peyton Turner. Oh, I knew it all along. He was my sleeper. Oh, he was my favorite in the class. I'm like, shut up. You never talked about Peyton Turner.
You're right.
And now he's a first round pick. You're trying to save yourself. And like, oh, I hit on him. Who cares if he hit or missed? Just admit that you didn't mention Peyton Turner at all. And you didn't see him being a first rounder. I didn't. It's all good.
Right.
Freaking cares.
Well, let's go, Patrick, to the New York Giants, who, if you ask, some people got 2 first rounders here in their first 2 picks. They got Kadarius Toney at number 21, Azeez Ojulari at number 50, and a guy who I had in mind for the Seahawks and Aaron Robinson out of UCF. Another one of those UCF corners who I actually really liked. What do you think about the Giants? I mean, it's all dependent on whether Kadarius Toney can do what he did in college, and that means he has to get rid of the case of the dropsies.
Well, my thing is, I think he's going to be fine, but how often is he going to play? Just because that running back room is so loaded. And that was my problem with them drafting a wide receiver in the first round. Because look at what they've already got. They've already signed in the offseason Kenny Galladay. They've already got John Ross, which I don't think he's going to make the team. But as of right now, they've got John Ross. They've already got Darius Slayton. They've still got Sterling Shepard. So, they can't all be on the field at the same freaking time. So, are you going to move one of them? John Ross is probably going to get cut, so that takes him out. So, either your first round pick isn't going to be on the field that much, or you may even just need to move on from a guy like Sterling Shepard. Let's face it, he's solid when he's on the field, but when is he on the field?
Right.
So, just cut him loose while you can. I do love the Azeez Ojulari pick. I think you mentioned he is a first runner that you got in the second. Aaron Robinson is going to be a very nice contributor early on as that third round selection. This isn't a team that is going to benefit from not having a lot of picks just because they've got a lot of holes. I mean, they weren't almost a finished product after year 1 of the Joe Judge experience. So they're not going to be fantastic in year 2 just because they haven't really added a ton of pieces to this team. But I think what they've done is a solid start in the right direction.
Potentially, at least. Let's move on to the other New York team, Patrick, and the New York Jets. They went Zach Wilson at number 2 overall, and then at 14, also in the first round, got Elijah Vera Tucker. I just top to bottom, I actually really like this draft class. Zach Wilson, we've heard me talk about him. Elijah Vera Tucker, is the best guard in this class. Elijah Moore could be an electric factory there. And I think Michael Carter is an underrated running back. Everybody was talking about Javonte Williams. I think Michael Carter is a very, very good running back. And Hamza Nasruddin, I'll say it eventually, I think is an interesting safety that they were able to pick up late in the draft. I think top to bottom of this, and your boy Jonathan Marshall out of Arkansas.
Marshall, man. I really hope they can get him in the rotation. But, I mean, for one, they've got their franchise quarterback for the next few years, R.I.P. James Morgan. But they were able to add another weapon in Elijah Morrison. Now they've got guys like Moore, Corey Davis, Denzel Mims, James Crowder, Keelan Cole, who they just brought in as well. They've got some solid weapons there, and not only that, they've solidified the left side with an offensive line with Mekhi Becton and now Elijah Vera Tucker. So could they have used some extra help on the right side with this draft? Sure. But, I mean,
well,
this is a brand new regime. It's going to take some time, and to get some type of help early on with your brand new quarterback, I think was crucial.
Well, Patrick, let me ask you this real quick. How do you know if this was a good draft class? Who's the head coach? It's not Adam Gase, which is the important bit there. That's all you need to know about the Jets. It's not Adam Gase anymore. Let's move on to the Philadelphia Eagles, Patrick. They traded up with the Cowboys, shockingly, to get Devontae Smith. Not shockingly from the Eagles' perspective. You can trade up and get Devontae Smith. You trade up and get Devontae Smith. And then I think they did a very good job with the Landon Dickerson pick. If their doctors know what they're doing, I think that's a very good pick. What do you think about the rest of this class?
Well, you say if their doctors know what they're doing. The Eagles, especially with their offensive line, are dropping like flies all the time, so they may not know what they're doing. But, I mean, if he's healthy, I love the pick because he can play literally any position on that line. Milton Williams was a workout stud. A workout stud coming from Louisiana Tech. With their history in the NFL, you know that worries me. And if you've seen the video that came about on the NFL Network stream after that pick, some of the guys in that draft room were not happy about it.
Yeah.
And the only one who was happy about it was the idiot Howie Roseman. Kenneth Gainwell in the 5th round, man.
Yeah, I forgot about that one. That's, I think, probably going to be a steal. We both like Kenneth Gainwell coming out. Probably thought he could have been, depending on where you draft running backs, in the a late second round, early third round guy. And they ended up getting him in the 5th, which was a very good spot for them.
Yeah, and then they drafted Taron Jackson from Coastal Carolina.
Shout out Sunbelt.
One of the favorites. And then Patrick Johnson of Tulane, which you mentioned one Tulane player earlier. This is the other of the duo. I think, honestly, as much as I love like the Devontae Smith and Landon Dickerson, some of my other favorites are just towards the 6th and 7th round of this class.
Yeah.
Because even Jacoby Stevens is going to contribute early on in special teams.
Yeah. So, Patrick, let's move now to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and we will avoid the Najee Harris talk because we spent a lot of time on that on draft night, and we're going to disagree on that. But in the second round, they did get Pat Freiermuth, which is probably a very, very good pick. And then they started addressing the offensive line a little bit and then going a little bit on the defense. They get Isaiah Loudermilk later, which is another one of the great names, and a corner out of OU, Trey Norwood, Quincy Roche. And then we drafted the beefy punter out of Georgia Tech, Presley Harvin III. Look, my main problem with this is that they didn't touch the quarterback position, and I think that's something they really got to start looking at. Even if Big Ben plays for another 2 years, which doesn't seem likely, but I wouldn't have thought he'd be playing this year even. So I question a little bit of that. And then, again, I will touch it a little teeny bit. I don't like the idea of getting Najee Harris when you have no offensive linemen.
See, I love Najee, and I honestly thought it was just like the perfect fit for him to go there just because they needed some rushing game. But as much as I love running backs, you were right.
Thank you.
Because they don't have an offensive line, and they never addressed it really. Like, who's Dan Moore? Who's Buddy Johnson? Like, both of them Buddy Johnson was the inside linebacker.
Kendrick Green. That's
who the hell is Kendrick Green? Like, they might be studs, and they might be like building blocks for future years. but you can't wait that long to address an O-line that was already declining to begin with. Like, Zach Banner at right tackle ain't going to be it.
Right.
Chimuka Okafor, Kevin Dotson, J.C. Hufshabé. Like, you got David DeCastro, and that's it. So, right now...
Small side note, Patrick, you pronouncing whatever name you just tried to pronounce reminds me of the video. So I guess it was Marshawn Lynch's birthday a couple days ago. And there's a video of him on the sideline trying to pronounce TJ Hushmanzada's name. And that very much sounded like you were going to do what you were trying to do there.
I haven't seen this video, but I need to.
Also, can I briefly say that one of my favorite celebrity appearances in a TV show, or athlete appearances in a TV show, is when the episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine where Marshawn Lynch is in it. It's incredible. Go find his bit in that show.
I need to find that. But
you just watch that show.
I do need to watch. But to me, Najee Harris, you got, if you want to get running back, go get the best one. I like Pat Freiermuth, but they needed to get an offensive line there. They didn't really need to go tight end there. In fact, you could have not pressed tight end and been fine.
And that's where I'll be fair about this, Patrick. I didn't like the Najee Harris pick for that reason. I don't like the Pat Freiermuth pick for that reason. And I would have been okay with Pat Freiermuth being a first. That's hard to say when you say Pat Freiermuth a lot. With him being a first-round pick, I'd have been okay if some team would have said, in the 25 to 32 range, said, hey, we're going to get Pat Freiermuth. I'd have been okay with that. But when you take him at 55 and you have no offensive line and you've got an aging quarterback and you've got a questionable wide receiver room just because sometimes they don't all mesh real well, I question a lot of things about that. I think they should have addressed the offensive line. There were a lot of good offensive linemen available when they went offensive line, or when they were picking those first two rounds.
I know we're going really long, but okay, Pat Freiermuth. Offensive. I mean, Creed Humphrey. They could have easily gone Creed Humphrey, played him inside. Even like going to the third round, freaking Jalen Mayfield. They could have done Brady Christensen. They could have done. There were some serviceable, solid offensive linemen there.
Right.
That they could have even. Picking Wyatt freaking Davis, the best guard you can put it left or right, you could have easily needed at left, but you just decided to just get the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah.
Just like Indianapolis.
Let's move on from the Steelers, Patrick, because we do need to get going a little bit. Also because my phone's getting close to dying, and that's where all my notes are. So that could be an issue. So let's go to San Francisco 49ers, Patrick. They take Trey Lance. They don't pick Mac Jones like everybody was pretending they were going to do, even though I very early on said that wasn't happening. Trey Lance, I think, is a smart move for them. They've got a year that they can kind of mess around with. Do we keep Jimmy Garoppolo for a year? Do we not? They can slow play Trey Lance, who I do think needs a year before he's ready, but I think could be a good quarterback down the road. Actually, the pick I really like here, obviously they got Jalen Moore later, which is an interesting pick out of Western Michigan, a pretty big body there. I really actually like the Trey Sermon pick at 88. An interesting running back for them to have in what could already be a crowded running back room, but you might as well keep the ball out of quarterback's hands if you can.
I mean, you can't overthrow somebody if he's not throwing to anyone.
Correct.
So you don't throw it anywhere if you hand it off. Some people have said that they like Elijah Mitchell even more than Trey Sermon in this offense. So it's going to be interesting just because, I mean, there's so many guys that they have. They're going to make some cuts before we get to the season just because there's so many running backs that they have. They'll probably cut half of it. I mean, there's not a ton of picks here that I really like, but it's another class that I just don't hate.
It's solid.
I do like. It's solid. I kind of like them addressing O-line earlier, and getting a guy like Aaron Banks and then Jalen Moore later, like you mentioned. But I mean, it's just kind of like a solid class all around. It's not sexy, but I think in a in a couple of years we'll see that it was a necessary class.
Right. It's a decent class, but it's not one that scares me as an in-division team. Now, Patrick, that being said, we're going to move on to my Seattle Seahawks, who only had 3 picks, so we didn't do a ton there, obviously. But look, if we're being honest with this, and this is not because of who the team is, I actually really like what the Seahawks were able to do with what they had. That's the big problem. What they had wasn't a ton. Dwayne Eskridge is going to be an interesting guy. I wasn't a huge fan of the fact that he's kind of old for a rookie. He's going to be 25, I think, when the season starts.
25.
So he'll be. Let's see. That means his second contract will be at 29, which I think DK Metcalf, by the time he's 29, will have had 2, almost 3 contracts by then. But I look, it's a speed guy. He's a burner. I like the idea of adding him in there. It's interesting. It was posted I saw it on Twitter, that Tyler Lockett is now the 3rd fastest receiver on that team. That's a scary thought. Also, shout out and good luck, and please don't hurt your hamstring to DK Metcalf as he attempts to qualify for the Olympics this week. That's a slightly scary thing.
That would scare me to death.
I love the pick of Oklahoma's Trey Brown. It's interesting because it's not necessarily a pick when you look at the track record of what Seattle likes at corner. It's not the typical long, lanky, long-arm corner. There's rumors that Richard Sherman might be up for a return to Seattle, and so that may be more of a thing. And Trey Brown's kind of a guy that if we bump him inside, I think will work out really, really well. And I love the Stone Forsythe pick. I think he's a guy that drafts as a tackle. We can move him down the line, move him in at guard a little bit. You can play him at right tackle maybe until he develops into eventually the replacement for Dwayne Brown. So again, not a lot to go off of, but I think this is actually a fairly decent class.
Notes, just as an outsider observing, no running back.
Thank God.
Which a streak of 100 years of drafting a running back.
Finally.
It looks like they might have signed one UDFA. So, again, no running back.
There were several. I don't remember them all, but there were several.
Brought in several wide receivers. So what my big take in is, please don't cut John Ursua.
I think that's a ship that's already sailed, Patrick. Speaking of old wide receivers who are on rookie contracts.
I think that ship has definitely sailed. I also didn't know you guys had Penny Hart, which I think is an interesting prospect who you probably won't have on roster in September.
No, better not be. I don't want him. Don't need him. Don't want him.
You don't need him. He was in Indianapolis. You don't need him. So,
all right, Patrick. Let's move on to the Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Who, I'm not necessarily. I think Joe Tryon was maybe a little bit of a reach at 32. There were some other good.
I named that pick.
Yeah, you did. I'll say this: I like what they did with Jalen Darden, and I really actually like what they did with Kyle Trask. I think Kyle Trask, that is a perfect landing spot for him. That style of offense. I know people think he doesn't have a lot of arm strength, but spoiler alert, he's got plenty of arm strength, and he's going to be able to throw the ball down the field. And Tom Brady is a good guy for him to learn from, because I think that's kind of what kind of quarterback he will be. Not on the same level of Tom Brady, but I think that style of quarterback lends well to him. So this is one that doesn't really, it's not super impressive to me, but it's a good solid. They don't need a lot. They didn't have to address a lot, so take some shots. They didn't have to address
anything. They brought everyone back. So this is pure depth. And if you look at this class in the sense of this is nothing but depth, I love it.
Yeah.
Because they've got another edge rusher in Joe Tryon, which, they're always looking to bring someone in the rotation. They've got a potential quarterback of the future in Trask. Jalen Darden is just a toy to play with. And they've got some solid guys as far as linebackers in KJ Britt and Grant Stewart with the Mr. Irrelevant selection, who could be solid if he sticks on the team. So, in the sense of depth, it's awesome.
Yeah, again, they don't have a lot to mess with, so don't fix. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Patrick, next to the last team, we got the Tennessee Titans. So in division for you, Man, this is either going to be a draft that really hardcore hits or really hardcore misses, and there's not a lot of in between. They took Caleb Farley at 22. If his medicals help or work out, that's obviously a very, very solid pick at corner. I like Dylan Radins, but outside of that, man, Elijah Molden maybe. Outside of that, I'm not super. I don't know enough about some of these guys to really comment hardcore. But again, to me, this is either you hit on it 100% or you missed it 100% draft.
I am probably going to declare one as a miss. I'm going to give you a fun tidbit.
Okay.
I think Monty Rice is already going to be a miss. He is, before the draft hit, he was already on his third agent since January.
Yikes.
If you're on your third, some people don't even have 3 agents in their entire life. If you're on your third agent in like 4 months, you're a problem. And it's the agent's not the problem, it's you.
Right. That's like if you see a girl who dates or a guy who dates a bunch of girls back to back to back, and he says they're all crazy. No. They're not all crazy. You crazy.
There's something wrong with you, my friend. I think
you're the problem.
It's going to be a solid piece for them. I mean, they need so much corner help; it's insane. So I think that's going to be solid. I think you kind of nailed it. Once you get past Molden, I don't know what you're really going to get. The Rashad Weaver situation is already crazy as it is. So that's just another question mark in that front office that is not really great at making decisions. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a stud class, or it's going to get some of those guys fired.
Yeah. All right, Patrick.
That's what we're down to.
Let's finish up with the Washington football team, who made a pick that you really like, I think, in Jamin Davis, or at least you did on draft night. And then they pick up Samuel Cosme in the second round. I don't know how to feel about this class. I don't necessarily like Jamin Davis. It's a 1-year guy who had a lot of production in 1 year, but nothing really before that. So that's a big question. This draft class to me is a big question mark. They picked a bunch of guys who are question marks. Again, kind of like with the Titans. This is either going to be a hardcore hit draft class or a hardcore miss draft class, and there's not necessarily going to be a lot in between. De'Ami Brown being a guy who might turn out to be a very, very good wide receiver. St. Juste at corner is an interesting guy that a lot of people seem to like. I actually really like Derek Forrest. I think that's one to keep an eye on at safety. Really, any of these defensive guys, just because of who Ron Rivera is, are guys to keep an eye out for because, again, as much as I wasn't necessarily a fan of picking Jamin Davis, if he's going to go to a team in the first round at the 19th overall pick, Ron Rivera makes the most sense.
That's why I like it. If he went really anywhere else, I don't know if I would have liked it. But with him going to Rivera and with him being the person in play that's going to be able to put that chess piece in the right direction that needs to be, that's why I like it. If he would have literally went anywhere else, I probably would have said it was a reach. And it might still be a bit of a reach, but because he's going to be coached by Ron Rivera, I think he's going to be just fine. Cosme, I think he was a second rounder, so I still don't love him, but maybe he can develop into something. I like De'Ami Brown quite a bit, so I think they're going to get someone solid there. I think they got some solid depth towards the end of the draft with guys like William Bradley King, Shaka Toney, Derek Forrest that you mentioned. They also drafted a long snapper and Cameron Cheeseman. I wish he would have went to Green Bay, but neither here nor there. But yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty solid draft class.
Yeah. So real quick, Patrick, give me your favorite draft or your favorite class, your favorite team, who you thought did the best, and who you thought did the worst.
So I'll name like 2 that I think did really well. Chicago was one that I think really did really well. It's just they traded out, went ahead and got their tight end, the quarterback of the future. They addressed their O-line that had some problems. Immediately, they got one of the best tackles, one of my favorites in the class. And they got some depth at some key positions. Another draft I really, really liked it's probably going to be Cleveland. I think they really nailed it on so many phases. They boosted their defense very quickly with guys like Cormo and Greg Newsome. James Hudson is a great rotational guy on the offensive line. Anthony Schwartz and a guy like Demetric Felton is going to open up the offense even more. Those are two draft classes that I think are really, really great. Indianapolis is the worst. I hate all of it. I exaggerate a little bit, but I really don't like it as a whole. Houston is one that I think was really awful. And probably